So welcome everybody. I hope you're having a great time with the Almond Conference in our second day. Again, we have prepared what we believe is a very interesting content for you in the different sessions. So I appreciate you are joining this one in particular. This one is called Predicting Plot Level Yield Early in the Season. Again, my name is Sebastian Sa. I'm the Associate Director of Agriculture Research. And we, in my capacity, as I discussed with our stakeholders about what to fund next, what type of research are needed or opportunities, we have talked about early season yields estimates at the plot level as probably a key component to be solved for precision management. As we like to say, you cannot improve what you don't measure. And I think one of the most key variables that we usually have a hard time to measure at a high resolution and understanding the variability that may happen in our plots early in the season is yield. So I designed this session to talk exactly about that, and I decided to do it two ways. First, in one part of the equation, we're going to be talking about how we do it today. For that end, to talk about how we quantify yield these days and how we use that information, I asked two of the speakers here to be present, specifically to JJ Magdaleno from Terra Nova Trading Inc., as well as Brian Ezell, former, he's at the end over there, former wonderful employee and now director of Set on Farms. You may recognize them because they both have lead teams in the past where they go and collect data in multiple orchards early in the season to come up with what is their estimate yield forecasting for the whole industry. If you have had the opportunity to read those reports, from a personal point of view, I think it's fascinating, all the considerations that they take in mind, the agronomic components and the technical components, and then that's what I asked specifically to JJ to talk, and also to Brian, how he used this information, how he used to use this information to take decisions or to have ideas from a marketing point of view or from an inventory point of view, etc. So that is a little bit what we're going to be talking today in terms of the present, in terms of how we do it today. But I want to move us one step forward and talk also about how we may be doing it in the future. For that end, we have been funding what we call a comprehensive research project in yield prediction and yield quantification. So yield prediction before harvest and yield quantification during harvest. That project is in its third year, and I think we have done significant progress in this area. The director of that project is Dr. Patrick Brown, a distinguished professor from the University of California, the second one here to my left. And he's going to give us a little bit of a research update together with one of his closest co-PI, principal investigators, professor from UC Davis, Yufan Jin, also the third person that you see here on the stage. And again, they're going to be talking a little bit more, maybe a technology that is not ready to be fully adopted, but it's in the process to get there. And I think they will clearly illustrate a lot of potential gains that can be done and a lot of variability that sometimes I personally haven't realized it. And I think it's going to be quite opening. I think we then will have an interesting time for Q&As about that. And again, they're going to tackle both components, how to predict early in the season and how to actually quantify yield during harvest at a more granular level inside of that plot level. So with that being said, we only have 1 hour for this session, so I'll stop talking and I will give it to JJ. Mm-hmm.
Hello, everybody. My name is JJ Magdaleno. I'm one of the partners at Terra Nova Trading. We do an annual crop estimate that I hope all of you have read at some point. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. It's a humorous comment that we make before we go out and do our estimate that I think all four of us on the panel get to look at and say, really what we're doing is trying to predict the future, which more or less is somewhat impossible. So a little bit of overview about what I want to speak about today, give everybody a little bit of history about how the Terra Nova crop estimate came about, how we do it, the big issues that we see in terms of what we see in April versus what actually gets harvested in August obviously can be drastically different. And then what we have found to be a human bias that I think we all have as we do these kinds of estimates. So a little bit about history about our estimate. It started way back in 1996. It was started by Michael Grant, who was one of the founders of Terra Nova, and Liam O'Gorman, who was a partner of GLM Trading based out of London. Basically, it started as two Brits who would get in a car, AAA map, unfold it, drive up and down the state. The reason it came about back then, there was a very large void of information from Bloom to the subjective estimate in May. We had found both, growers, sellers, buyers in the industry wanted to have a little bit more information to have better ideas of whether it's inputs on the grower side or marketing decisions on the seller side, or how to buy almonds in the market on the buyer side. So people needed a little bit of information when there was that 3-month gap. So Michael and Liam said, well, why don't we just go do it ourselves? Throughout the 27-year history of the estimate, I think we've been somewhat accurate to give everybody confidence into listening what we say. It's a well-intentioned estimate. I always joke with my mom, no matter how accurate we can be, whenever we do give the estimate, 50% of the people that we talk to will end up being upset at us. Either it's going to be too low or too high, but inevitably somebody's going to be upset, which kind of makes it the Sisyphean task that we have. It's always endless, futile. Even though we've been within 1%, I think about 4 or 5 times in our estimating, we've never actually got it right. And so it's a very difficult thing that we're doing. It is more or less just a best guess. And so while it is a free estimate, Michael always wrote at the end of the report, money back guarantee for everybody. And then one of the things that Michael and Liam prided themselves on in the estimate was everybody always wants to know what's the number. For anybody who has read it, I hope you take the time to read. It's usually about a 5-page estimate that gives a brief overview of everything that's going on up and down the valley at that time. So water issues, orchard removals, changes in varieties. Basically, it's an overview of what we have seen in the 9 days that we're doing it. Obviously, it comes with an estimate, but our intention is to just give a brief overview of what we're seeing. So how do we do it? Before we go out every year, we look back at last year and we say, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And why was that? Obviously, this year, I think we're going to have a lot of soul searching, I guess, to figure out what we missed, as I think, especially in the South, we've just missed it quite substantially. But overall, it's just a lot of hard work. So the picture that you see on the screen, those are the orchards that we see every year. We're basically looking at 500 or more orchards, doing over 1,000 data points every time. Basically, we're looking at orchards from sunrise to sunset. Thanks to the Apple Watch that we have, we find we're walking anywhere from 8 to 10 miles a day. Basically, it's just putting a lot of hard work into it. We have no secret sauce or anything like that. It's just we go out every day, we look at it, and we keep moving. And then one of the large things that we try and do, especially with the changing demographic of the state, the migration from orchards from the south to the north, changing varieties, we try and get a snapshot of basically the entire state. So obviously with the migration from north to south, we're taking readings from the south, taking less now from the south and trying to add more in the north, trying to do more nonpareils independence, as that is more of the majority of the industry now. And then we also try and get a good age range as well. Obviously, in the last 10 years, there have been a lot of plantings, and so we want to make sure that we're getting a good, accurate reading of, even if it's a third leaf tree, we want to make sure we have a good reading of all the young stuff as well. So one of the things that we try and harp on in the report, whenever we release the report, we're looking at trees in April. That is obviously a big change from April to harvest. A lot of things can happen. I think this year is a good example of what can happen. we always have to deal with the drops that we see. So usually when we go out, it's very early April. Inevitably, the first drop will come right after we go out and look, so we cannot predict on that. There can be a summer drop that we can't see. Again, what we see in April is not necessarily what's going to be harvested. We do get a lot of growers throughout the year who tell us, hey, didn't you hear about that hailstorm that happened in Bakersfield, or didn't you hear about the windstorm that happened in Modesto? Do you think that has to affect how you guys predict the crop? While it is a very important thing for the growers that have to deal with it, the state is such a large state and the demographic is so big, it ends up being very minute, so we don't really try and say that that's going to play a huge role into predicting the crop. Like it says there, Mother Nature, especially for a state as large as ours in California, the Mother Nature events seem to be very localized. So while we do have adverse weather events, it does seem to be a very localized event. But contradictory to that statement, the heat wave that we had this year was a very extreme, severe, and statewide event. Obviously, we could not see that in April when we were out there. We think we could have lost anywhere from 3 to 5% of the crop just on the heat alone. But again, that's not something that we can see when we go out in April. And then one of the other things that we try to address before we go out is the human bias element that inevitably comes with doing an estimate like this. No matter how much you try and take away your own beliefs before you go out, you have some kind of bias in your mind. There'll be many times when we're going out and we'll score an orchard and I'll ask myself, did I actually see that or did I want to see that? It's a very difficult thing for anybody here who's a farmer or a farm manager to be able to look at an orchard and not have a biased view on it. And we do find that the closer one is to an orchard, whether it's the farmer or farm manager, obviously the more biased they're going to be on their opinion of that crop. It's something that all humans have to deal with, but we always find that a farmer or farm manager will overestimate the crop that they're dealing with by a substantial amount. It's not to say they don't know how to estimate it, but it's that human bias that everybody has, that you're going to look at something and you're going to see what you want to see. And then the last point that we always find very interesting, we find that the market can actually dictate a lot of people's views of what they see on the crop size. So for instance, on a very bullish market, people's views of the crop get smaller. On a very bearish market, people's views on the crops actually get larger. And so we saw that this year when we went out. Obviously, we were all dealing with very depressed prices. And we were hearing from the growers themselves saying, this is one of the biggest crops I've ever seen. It's 3.3 billion pounds, watch out. And Stuart and I go out on the first day and kind of went, well, it doesn't quite look that way on the trees. But I think people's views of seeing of the market actually had the effects on their actual views of the crop size themselves. So human bias is something I think that the two people here who are going to speak from the UC Davis will be able to address in a different way than Brian and myself look at it. Inevitably, Brian and I, we are humans inevitably, and we do have those issues. So we try and take it out as much as we can, but it's basically an impossible feat. So that's all I have. Thank you. If anybody has any questions at the end of the session, please let me know.
Well, thank you for that excellent introduction. So I'm going to talk about the project that the almond industry has been funding with 5 of us, 5 PIs in a coordinated project. Of course, the first question, which has been partially answered, why do we even bother with yield prediction? Clearly there is the market, there's the planning, the logistics, which JJ just spoke about, but there's another level which is also super important, and that is orchard optimization. How will you choose to manage your orchard if you have a good vision of what the yield of that orchard will be in the coming year? You'll see also as we go through this, there's a lot of information that you can gather from understanding the variability and the yield of an orchard for explaining why trees are yielding in the manner that they are. And I'll show you some examples in a moment. So we all know that variability is a big issue. You can think of it at the whole county level. So this is statewide data, and you can see the bars jumping up and down for the various counties shown here. You can zoom in to a smaller level. So this is a single orchard, and Professor Jin will be showing some more of these sorts of graphs. But you can see the extent of the variability here, with the peak of the production in that 8 to 10 year period, in this particular case falling off, probably because of access to water over the subsequent years. But that sort of variability changes how you as a grower would choose to manage if you had a way of knowing that it was going to occur. So you can also go to a much finer resolution. So this is some work from Professor Yufeng Jin, estimating the yield of every single tree in a 130-acre field. And you can see as you look across that field the degree of variability that's present. Estimating just roughly, those red areas are only running 1,000 pounds, the darker blue running 3,000 pounds, all within a single orchard. So why is this variability so high, and what can we do about it? And as I'm a plant nutritionist, how would you choose to fertilize this field, given that variability? So we've been looking at single tree level yield data, and I know most growers will say I would never manage at a single tree, but it provides us a lot of information that can help us understand what is causing this variability, and it can also be used to feed information into our whole block or our whole farm or our whole county level estimations as well. So they build upon each other. So this is the system that was built. Stavros Boujakis has a poster downstairs describing this. We can now, at field harvest speeds, get single tree resolution yield data using this device here. The first thing you notice once you do this, and this is a record of 5 different orchards where we have done more than 1,000 trees in each orchard, we always get this distribution of yield throughout the orchard. And in almost every one of these examples, the average yield represents the sum across that entire orchard, but fully 40% of the orchard will be yielding 1.5 to 2 times higher than the average of the orchard. Equally, 40% of the orchard will be yielding substantially less than the average of the orchard. And the only time these curves become narrow is when you have a very high yielding orchard, indicating that the secret to high yield is eliminating variation in the field. So we want to understand yield prediction from these 2 scales. Professor Jin will talk about the statewide analysis, where we get predictions of yield based upon 185 orchards that we've assessed over many years. Okay? We also wish to go and look at yield variability within the field. And then ultimately, when you put the 2 pieces together, they enrich each other and give you a better and a stronger algorithm. So, complicated graph, I'm just going to break it down into the 2 halves. So the project that the almond industry funded was both this county-level understanding of yield variability, and this is built upon knowledge of weather, knowledge of the crop canopy itself, knowledge of last year's yield, a lot of variables that you as an individual grower would be able to go into the field and say, I think next year it's going to do X because of these conditions. The second half of the project is where we get into the within-field variability, and we try to explain what is causing the variability across an orchard or between orchards or between counties. Okay. So just a few preludes for Professor Jin's presentation of what we have learned about what factors influence variation of yield, in this case at the large scale, at the county scale. Okay? And so you can do an analysis and do a variety of statistics, and some of the factors are quite obvious. So age is a big one, canopy volume is a big one. But we can start to pick out other variables. Long-term spring mean temperature, previous year's summer temperature, previous year's yield, precipitation in March. Knowledge of those variables will help inform the other surveys that JJ and the others are doing to attempt to explain when their estimations are not accurate enough. And also to attempt to bring county level information all the way down to field level. When you look at small scale variability, as I said, really quite striking variability exists in every orchard that we have ever measured. So any of you, when you think you have a 3,000 pound average yield, you can be certain 20, 30, 40% of your orchard is running 4,000 or 4,500, but 20, 30% of your orchard is running 2,000. And if you could understand that and correct that, then you bring yourself up to the higher net yield. But some of the variables that are very clearly involved, again, canopy size is important. And it's true that measurements of canopy size can tell you the potential yield of each individual tree. Of course, you then have to add, did the bees visit that tree? Was there good cultivar overlap? What were the spring conditions that led to the first drop or the second drop? A lot of little pieces to the puzzle. Fruit set, nutrition, soil type, irrigation. We're starting to pull out a lot of these variables that will help us make more informed decisions about how to manage our orchards and what decisions to make. Some of the physiological, there's a poster downstairs, you can look at this in more detail subsequently, but some of the variability that we've seen in yield from year to year can be explained by the interaction between yield and growth. So the bottom left there is a measure of growth and its relationship to next year's yield. So if you don't put new budwood on, if you don't put new flowering positions on this year, it will hurt you next year. And those relationships are important drivers, and what we as managers should be thinking about is, what do we do to manage this? What do we do to minimize this interaction from year to year? I'm going to finish up just with this slide. Nitrogen management is an important constraint in all of almond growing. Many of you are in irrigated lands programs. You have to report your nitrogen applications. You have to manage your nitrogen application with efficiency. But when you think of a field such as this, 160 acres, you have zones of productivity of 4,000 pounds, where the nitrogen demand in that portion of the field, here it's listed as 48,000, but in the 2,600 zone, much less nitrogen demand. Now, the reality when fertilizing fields is the only place in this field that is going to leak nitrogen is the low-yielding portions of the field where you have over-applied the nitrogen because you were looking at the average, not the range, okay? And it can become financially irrelevant. Just differentially managing on nitrogen alone for this 160-acre orchard is an $8,000 difference in nitrogen application. Of course, you need to know this exists, and you need the systems, the management systems, the injection systems, or the variable rate systems to do something about it. But it's clearly not sufficient if we're going to maximize productivity to ignore this, either the low-yielding areas and trying to determine what they're doing, or to manage efficiently so that you're not over-applying in low-yielding areas when you don't need to, or under-applying in high-yielding areas, which is another important consideration. If you've uniformly manage this field to the field average of 3,000 pounds, you will have under-fertilized your best trees. And that's an important constraint for subsequent years. With that, thank you very much. And we have time for questions afterwards.
All right, good morning. Thanks, Patrick and JJ, for the excellent talks. Before I start to share our recent findings, I would like to thank my postdocs who did most of the job, and also all the collaborators from the larger Almond project funded by Almond Board. So as Patrick and JJ mentioned, our big motivation for yield prediction is really this large fluctuations from year to year at individual block level. What I'm showing you here is just one example for an orchard in Colusa County. As you can see, there's almost 3 or 4 folds of variation in terms of yield from year to year, and also large differences between different cultivars. So just another example, same cultivar composition as the previous example, 50% nonpareil, and then the rest was split to 3 different cultivars. As you can see, sometimes the yield for each individual cultivar don't necessarily synchronize from each other, right? You may get higher yield for nonpareil, but in some years, you may get lower yield for other cultivars. There's also big differences between these 2 different orchards, although the composition is more or less similar and within the same county. Another example in the southern part of California, this is showing the production during the mature stage. As you can see, also huge variation. But in general, we did see more productive orchard in the southern part of Central Valley. So the question is, how can we predict the almond yield at each individual block level in a more quantitative, objective, and also cost-effective way, building upon all the knowledge and wisdoms that were shared by JJ and Patrick. So our hypothesis is for any particular orchard at a given year, the production is pretty much governed by the full history of the orchard growth, most likely determined by either long-term climate or the soil properties in that orchard, and also regulated by short-term weather conditions like precipitation in March during the bloom season, or even the previous year, if we had super hot summer, it may affect the next year's production, right? And some of the management practices also will be affecting the yield. So how can we observe all those impact of these different drivers on tree growth and eventually the yield? That's where we really rely on remote sensing technology. As we all know, in recent, I would say, decade, the rapid advance in remote sensing technology has improved our monitoring capability from the individual tree level to individual orchard level. With the observations from multiple wavelengths, we can see not just the color of individual orchard at different growth stage. We can also detect some of the stress conditions during the orchard growth at different wavelengths beyond our human vision. More importantly, most of these sensors, especially satellite imagery, they are collecting imagery constantly through time, right? So we can get these repeated observations in a more efficient way. One example is the imagery from Landsat satellite systems, which had almost 4 decades of observations every 16 days. So we can really track the full growth history of each individual orchard at 30-meter resolution, multiple wavelength bands. On the right, I'm showing you one example. We can actually use that full growth history to track back when the orchard was planted and then also derive the age of that orchard. And these repeated observations also provide a scalable approach to track the phenology of almond growth, for example, the flowering dynamics, and also tree growth throughout the season. Here is one example showing you how we can take advantage of this repeated observation from either aerial imagery or satellite imagery to track the flowering dynamics. We developed the enhanced bloom index to track the almond bloom dynamics, right? On the left, I'm showing you the imagery from Planetscope, which almost provide daily observations at 3-meter resolution, has 4 bands. And in the middle, I'm showing you the enhanced bloom index derived from this high-resolution imagery from a cluster of orchards. As you can see through time, from January to March, we can see this evolution of bloom dynamics. It peaked more or less in like late February in 2018, and on the right, the curve shows like every 5 days or weekly timescale. As long as there's no cloud, we can monitor this bloom condition. So that gives us more quantitative information about the timing and also the intensity of bloom information through almond orchards. We can also use publicly available free imagery from Sentinel to track similar dynamics as well. So the framework for our yield prediction is really trying to take advantage of all this imagery from different sensors and integrate them with all the climate data, weather information, and also some of the orchard level characteristics, such as cultivar age, to predict the yield early in the season. And then in the mid-season, when we have more imagery becoming available, we can integrate all those emerging conditions of flowering and tree growth captured by imagery to adjust the yield prediction that was done in the early season. So the main idea is we are trying to use more complicated machine learning approach, because when you look at individual orchard level, you can browse through almost 200 individual orchards, look at through time how they change. But as humans, it's really hard to really understand what's really driving those variability throughout the years and across the orchards. With a machine learning approach, we can piece together all these potential drivers and let the model to learn from historical data and then figure out what are the most important drivers, and then also predict yield when we have newer data comes in for different orchard in different years. So that's, in general, our framework for yield prediction. So this one is showing the example from our first round of modeling work using Landsat public available satellite imageries together with orchard age, cultivar information, climate, weather information, and some of the fractional vegetation cover, vegetation indices, and to predict yield like around March timeframe. As you can see with the model trend from almost 200 orchards across 10 years of record, the prediction did decent job. We are getting like 71% of R² for the full model. We can also do some reduced model if I don't have previous yield record, if I don't have cultivar information. The more generalized model still do a good, decent job. The accuracy will be more or less lower compared to full model if you have all this sweet set of predictors. Yeah, and as we approach to the end of the season, we can update our yield prediction using weather in, for example, April, May, and June, and more remote sensing observations. The improvement is, for now, is still marginal. It's not like a huge improvement through time. But again, this is only our first round of yield model prediction at individual level. We didn't include the flowering information for this set because we didn't have that algorithm when we build this model. But next step, we'll be incorporating more historical data. We have a larger training data sets, and we'll incorporate more flowering information, other information to improve our model prediction. This is showing you once the model is trained, we can apply that model to every single orchard through the whole state of California and do the prediction for every individual orchard. On the top, I'm showing you the predicted, showing in red, I think, and for all the mature orchards, and then we aggregate it to the scale. As you can see, prediction follow the ground-based measurements pretty well, tracking that year-to-year variability and also regional difference through southern part of orchard and northern part of orchard. So that's on the individual block level. We are also developing machine learning based approach to improve our prediction at individual tree level. Again, by taking advantage of relatively high resolution satellite imagery through time and using deep learning approach. So we can ingest like a monthly or weekly imagery from planet scope at 3-meter resolution at 4 different wavelength regions, and then predict yield early in the season, starting from even December, January, and March, like forecasting the yield at the end of the season. So this one was a trend with more than 1,800 of individual harvest trees in the Vacaville orchard. As you can see, in December, January, the model performance forecasting skills is relatively low, but once you incorporate imagery from February and March, the R-square jumped rapidly. That's really showing the information from blooming can advance our forecasting skills significantly. As season goes, we continue adding more imagery to our model, and then prediction, the forecasting skills improved slightly over time. So again, this is still like a preliminary results. We were just using thousands of trees from one orchard. Now with the Almond Board funded project, we had 2 other orchards with additional couple thousand of trees in different years, so we can build more robust models to forecast yield at like 3-meter individual tree scale. So yeah, so this one again showing you the predicted individual tree level yield in Vacaville. The one, the forecasting was done like in early March. As you can see, we can still capture decent spatial variability within each individual orchard, and the comparison with ground truthing data showed a decent performance. Okay, yeah, so just in summary, remote sensing technology can improve our monitoring capability across different scales, and with machine learning approach, we can harness all this big data and to forecast yield early in the season, and also adjust the yield estimation through time. Yeah, so I think there's still a lot of work to be done with more data we are collecting. With that, I would like to thank all our partners, collaborators, and our funding sources. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Ezel, and I, over my career at Wonderful, we had the opportunity to go on mini tours and publish the crop forecast towards the beginning of May, right before this objective estimate. And so in line with what JJ did, we'll just kind of go through very quickly the things that we look at to try to develop this estimate. And so you're going to see a lot of slides, and they are really going to be eye graphs or challenging, and I'm just there to show you the data's done. But all this data we have been capturing over a period of 24 years. So we use this as a baseline before we go out and actually look at the orchards. Okay, so first variable we got to know is how many acres are we talking about in the state. Luckily, you know, Land IQ has developed tools where we have a lot of confidence in the overall acres in the state as well as by county. What we are missing is by variety. But one of the things we can do is we can supplement and use the actual receipt data from year to year to come up with an appropriate mix. NASS does do an acreage report every year, but because of the lack of participation by the growers in this industry, not turning in their cards and reporting that data, the detailed data in that report to the variety level by county, whatever, is just not that accurate. So I would encourage you, if you guys want better estimates, when you get that little postcard or email to fill that out, please fill that out. They're asking for that for a reason. Trust me, it's not going to be, your individual information is going to be spread over the world. But the better data we have on acreage as an industry, the better planning we can do as a marketing team at the Almond Board, because we set our budgets based on what the ultimate crop estimates come out, the subjective and the objective. And so I'd encourage you to do that, but that's a baseline. We have all that data. Here's even bigger eye chart, but the reality of our industry is because of a marketing order, we're required to report all of our shipments, or as well as our production. So we can gather that data from the ABC, and we can look at it by county, we can look at it by variety over time. So it's another important piece that helps us develop our estimates. We take that data and we can go down and do it by county. So if you'll see here, we have a history going back 24 years of the yield per acre by county and the total receipts for both pollinators as a group and nonpareil. And so we use this data to refer to and help develop our estimates as we go forward. We do a summary of this so you can see by region, and northern, central, and southern pollinators versus nonpareil, kind of a higher level summary. We also use this as a tool for the people that go on our tour so they can reference this. We note where the peak yields were at and then the second biggest. And once we go through all this data, we are ready for a tour, right, of the state. So it's good to have all the history data, but the reality is you got to have boots on the ground, you have eyes on the trees. And for our group, it's 16 to 20 participants. Most of them are actually farmers and PCAs and irrigation managers who are out in the orchards all the time in the acreage that we own. So it's a very good perspective. And then there's a few of us that were just marketing sales and operations from a plant perspective, but very passionate about this cause. And so we were in that mix as well. But we have usually these three participating companies, Wonderful, Famosa, AgWise. But in the past, we've also had some other farming groups join us, which we always love to have. The more, the better. But we cover a lot of territory too. You got to give Terra Nova props because they do this for 9 days with a few guys, one vehicle. We're split up. We have more resources to cover more areas. And in 3 days, you are done looking at trees. I'm telling you, it is just, so I don't know how you do it for 9 days. I just can't imagine. So from all this data, what we do with our participants is we create some tools, right? So we have all this data, so we say, okay, when you get done looking at the crop and looking at all the data we shared, here's some tools where you can just kind of plug in the percentage up or down versus the most recent crop you saw, and then it'll calculate what your new estimate is. So this is by county, nonpareil versus pollinators. Similarly, we can actually, if they really like to do their work, since we've been in each individual county, we have the history of the yield per acre by county for pollinators and nonpareil, again, going back many years. So all they have to do is say, they can look back in history and say, look there's, I'm going to pick 2006 is what I can remember this crop looked like. In this county, I'm going to say, it's 10% over last year, and it'll calculate, if they go through this process for pollinators and for nonpareil, they'll come up with a total crop estimate. One of the things that we're very privileged is one of our partners in this venture, they actually go out and count over 100 trees every year, 100% of the nuts. So we use that as a baseline. Before we start our tour, we go to their ranches, and we usually get to see 4 or 5 different ranches, 2 or 3 varieties in each ranch. And they'll walk us out in the middle orchard sometimes it's close to the edge, and they say, okay, this tree, how many nuts are on that tree? And you're like, I don't know, And it's really funny how different varieties look different. You think one has a ton of nuts, and it really doesn't, and the other one has very few nuts and it has a lot of nuts, so because every canopy is different. But by doing that, we can say, well, on average, we were seeing a lot of trees that looked similar to the ones that were 8,000 nuts per tree or 6,000 nuts per tree. And by using this chart and knowing what the footprint of the orchard, the spacing, and the nut sizing we're seeing, we can determine what the yield is at 8,000 nuts at a 18 by 24 planting, right? We can know how many pounds per acre. And the reason why that's kind of important is size does matter. You'll see in this chart on the yellow line and all those, using a 24 count versus a 26 count, it's 200 pounds per acre swing on the same number of nuts and the same trees per acre. So that comes in play with our estimate. And then when we get done, everybody turns in their worksheets. When we get everybody's worksheets in, I have a good friend, Abe Padilla, who's a master at regression analysis, and we go in, everybody turns in their stuff, and then he picks what's going to be the best fit, usually based on the most accurate predictors of the past. This past year, we were at 2.91 overall. And then, of course, we track not only our performance, but we track the performance of Terra Nova and NAS to see how we're doing. And frankly, it's very pleasing to see that our estimates are right on track with the others. In some cases, a little better. If you just kind of look at the overall average, the 3-5 year, we're within a percent on those averages. But I was told early on that you don't want to look at averages, you want to look at standard deviation, and I'll explain why. So the example I was told was, my wife has diarrhea and I have constipation, but on average, we're good, right? Well, the same thing with estimating the crop. Averages don't work because you can miss 200 million one year and then 200 million the next year the other direction. So we put a lot of focus on that. So why do we do this? Why do we go through all this effort? Well, a lot of it's just personal that, hey, how big do we really feel the crop is, and how does that going to affect how we market the balance of this year's crop, because we're still marketing the current year's crop, and what our pricing and sales strategy will be as we finish up. It also helps us with our budgeting for the new year. So we're got to develop budgets and cash flow budgets and what we think the price will be and how much volume. So that's really important. As a processor, it really helps us. Are we having a big crop? Do we believe we have a big crop? Not just statewide, but within our own. What do we need to do different? Do we need to get more bins? Do we need to find more storage? Or are we going to have plenty of those types of things? And then lastly, our sales strategy too, because as we're out there looking at the nuts, we can see the defects, because we do open and cut nuts, we do walk orchards, and we can see, okay, these nuts are going to be small, but our sales mix with our current customer base is mostly large nuts. So what are we going to do about that going into this year, or vice versa? And I think one of the real reasons we actually publish it, because we don't have to publish this is our own effort, our own money and gas and time, is we really would like to see more stability. There's a lot of speculation how big the crop is. JJ talked about there is a ton of bias, not just at the grower level, but at the seller level and at the buyer level. And our hope was if we could put out a good product that's fairly accurate, it would give more confidence around the other estimates as well. And so that's why we share it publicly. If you ever read Teddy Roosevelt's Man in the Arena poem, that's kind of what we're doing. We are leaving ourselves open for criticism because we publish it, and if we're wrong, everybody's like, oh, you guys said it was this. Well, you know what? We tried, and we tried with the right motive in mind. So we do that, and so let's go to this last slides. So from an operations orchard, so much of it's already been talked about, so I'm not going to hit this. I know this presentation will be available later for people to look at my specific notes. But you know, as we get down, it's going to affect how the grower fertilizes and how much nitrogen, potassium. You know, water's not quite as big a factor on this, especially because they're usually associated with wetter crop years. And then we'll also influence the grower as he communicates with the hullers, telling them how much volume they're going to have coming in this year and how they need to prepare, as well as their trucking. So those are the main things, but I will tell you, for me personally, since doing this since 2011 with this group, selfishly, the 3 days I've got to spend every year with our farming team and our partners in this, and got so much knowledge of farming, because I'm an operations, sales, finance guy by training. I've learned so much about almond farming and what you all do, and grown such a huge appreciation for the risk and the effort you guys all put in to grow these crops. And I would say that the friendships I've built during that time have just been such a blessing. So selfishly, there's a lot of selfishness. So anyhow, that's how we do it, and hopefully that will continue into the future, and I'll pass it back. Sebastian?
Again, thank you so much to all the speakers. I think we may get the award this time for most data points in one single presentation. But it's actually a good thing. It's actually a good thing because, as I started at the beginning, I really think it's very hard to improve what you don't measure. And it really illustrates the hard work that you are all doing to really quantify what is a really key variable. How much you're going to produce this season, what is your variability, how much you produce this season. Well, unfortunately, I see some questions and we're past time, so I will invite those people that have questions to come over nearby and end the session. Thank you so much.